Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast. Each week you'll find inspirational, motivational interviews with some of the world's best language learners, industry experts, all trying to help you to learn foreign languages better, faster, and more efficiently. And here we go. If you're looking for a language teacher to enhance your language learning, then I highly recommend italki. Italki is the world's biggest tutoring platform, and you can find thousands of teachers and tutors at very reasonable prices. Get a free lesson after completing your first lesson by going to languageteacher.co. Hey, just a quick note, if you're listening to this after September 2019, you can skip to minute 7 for the start of today's interview. Hey guys, how is it going? This is episode 161. Today we're going to be talking a lot about traveling, a lot about learning a language to a really high level. My guest today, Jon Mahoney, really has gotten to a very high point in Russian. He shares his experiences in today's episode. But we also talk about his epic multi-year-long trip around the world and how he was surprised at how affordable traveling around the world could be, and that's really the big kind of overarching theme for this episode is traveling and mastering a language. But before we get into that, I just wanted to take a moment to just have a chat with you. A few kind of orders of business, if you will. First of all, I just had a new plugin installed on the website which allowed me to see all the podcast reviews from all over the world. In case you don't know, if you go on iTunes, it will only show you the reviews from the country that you're in. So if you live in the UK, you'll only see the UK reviews, unless you go in and change your language in the store or your location. And so I read a bunch of new reviews that I've never seen before, and I just want to thank you guys for leaving so many great positive reviews. I mean, I think there was 46 reviews from some of them even a few years back, so I'm sorry for having missed them back then. And there was only one that wasn't 5 stars, so I really appreciate you guys reviewing it, and obviously it must be doing something right, and that really makes me happy as well, because sometimes when you do these things, there isn't an immediate feedback. I get a lot of messages and emails, or I should say occasional messages and emails from people saying, oh, I really like that, and that was really nice, please keep doing it and all that. But there's also a lot of time where you're just kind of grinding it out. You're just doing all these episodes, and you don't really know why you're doing it, but at the end of the day, if you have fun doing it and people like it, then why not keep going? So that was the first one. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for leaving the reviews. The second is, I'm really excited about Langfest Montreal, or well, it's just called Langfest, but it's always in Montreal so far. By the time of this recording, it's a few weeks away, about 3 weeks away. So if you are attending, please come and say hi. I'd love to meet listeners of the podcast in real life, and I don't make it to North America that often, so it'd be cool to meet some of you guys. Otherwise, I'm just looking forward to hanging out, having a good time, and seeing the beautiful city of Montreal again, which I was back in 2016, back when it was called the North American Polygon Symposium. I'm glad they changed it to Langfest. The other thing is, if you're listening to this in the end of July or early August, there's still some time to register for the first Polygon Cruise, which is an event that I'm putting on with a few friends next spring. And it's basically, we have a little section of a big cruise ship, and we're going to do a conference on board with talks from a few select amazing speakers, some of my friends, and I might also be speaking a bit if there's any topics that I can really provide some good insights to. But the beauty is we're going to do it in the Mediterranean seas. We're going to see, I think, 6 different cities, and there's like 4 languages being spoken there, and obviously there's lots of people on the ship that speak various languages, and there's lots of time to do all the stuff you want to do on a ship, and obviously great food and drink, and it's suitable for people of all ages with families. As long as you're over 21, you can go on your own. And so it's a bit like the Polygon Gathering combined with a luxury cruise holiday. And it's only we're only doing the conference for a few hours a day. It's really about socializing, getting to know people. And at this point, we have about 30 to 40 people registered. Not sure what the current number is, but that just means there's going to be a lot of time to get to know each other. And if you're interested in turning your language hobby into a career, this really is probably the best place to do it, because There's three of the speakers: Lindsay Williams, Kirsten Cable, Ollie Richards, and myself to some degree, have all kind of pivoted into languages as a profession in very different ways. Creating online courses, teaching. I do affiliate marketing, so I would recommend products. I'll do reviews and all that kind of stuff. This podcast is sponsored by Italki. So there's lots of ways you can kind of drill down and get to know all these things. And if you want to start an online business or even just a language business or teaching, you're going to have a whole week on a ship with some experts who've done it, and you can chat over drinks or coffee or breakfast or whatever about any problem you might have. So this is really, I think, quite a unique opportunity. And obviously, because it's so far away, it's in April. And it's the first time that it's ever happened. Obviously, we haven't quite reached the 100 participants. That's the maximum, and I don't think we will anyway. Not that it matters, but I think once we've done it once and we've seen how it is, and we've got pictures and videos and trip reports and everything, I think number 2, which will be next year, should be, or the year after, should be filling up quite a lot faster. It's the same with any kind of event. So go check out polygoncruise.com if you're interested. I'd love to see you there. That's going to be super fun. April 2020. It's probably a better way of saying it. And I think that was about it. I just want to, again, thank you so much for listening. And sorry for kind of waffling on a bit here for the first few minutes. But sometimes, I don't have any really introductions in the podcast. And there's just a few things to take up. So enjoy the episode with Jon. It's a bit different this time. We don't talk that much about language. I do ask him a few questions about his Russian mastery, which is something that I'm very envious of. I've been learning Russian for quite a few years, but I'm really mostly fascinated by his travels, like the world travels, which I think a lot of us out there have a secret kind of dream about doing, or at least something similar. You don't want to maybe travel for 5 years in a row, or even a couple of years. But maybe this will give you some inspiration and ideas for you to go on your trip. So enjoy the episode with Jon, and I'll see you in the next one.
My name is Jon, Jonathan. I'm from Canada. I grew up in Nova Scotia, Canada, on the East Coast. And how I got into the language world, I think it kind of all started when I just started high school. So I guess I was 15, and in my school at the time, there was like 30 exchange students. And the part of Canada where I'm from, there's a lot of immigrants in Canada from all over the world, with lots of languages. But the small town in Nova Scotia where I grew up and went to school was very white, very English speaking. So you didn't hear that many other languages, and you didn't meet people from other countries that often, especially back then. Now there's more, but I was really fascinated by these international students. So I spent most of my time when I was actually at high school. I spent most of my time with these foreign students. There was a lot from Mexico, from Brazil, from Germany. There was one from Russia, and several different countries, Thailand, and I think that sort of started my interest in different cultures and different languages. I would say that's definitely where I could trace it back to.
Did you have French in school?
Yeah, so it definitely wasn't my first experience with a foreign language, but French is sort of I have a strange experience with French. Yeah, I think from 4th grade we started French, if I'm not mistaken. And when I was in 5th grade, my parents sent me to a French school where everything was French, and it was very difficult. It was forbidden to speak English at the school. And so I was just thrown in kind of, I don't know, almost like I got just, moved to France and I didn't have any choice. So I was given all this homework and all the subjects, right, and math and history and stuff. And I would come home and I didn't even understand like what they said. I don't know what's written there. And after about half a year, I switched back to English. I was, lots of lots of evenings crying and just didn't understand. And then I guess I disliked the English school so much that a year and a half later, I went back again to the French school.
Oh, wow.
So I went from grade 7 to 9, which I guess is something like from 12 to 14 years old. I was at a French school, and it was difficult. And it's kind of strange. I was thinking about it today. It's sort of like if I started a movie or a book in the middle and I didn't finish it. Because when I went to the French school in 7th grade, I remember in French class, it's not for like French as a second language. It's like French as a native language. So I remember we had like a 50-page booklet on passé composé. If anybody studied French, you know that this is a verb tense that's a little bit difficult. And but I never did like the basics. Nobody ever taught me like present or something like that. So I understand French very well, and I can speak it. I can communicate, but I have a weird relationship with French because before I was, I think, 18, I never met a single person who spoke French but didn't speak English. So it was sort of just like a game. I didn't understand why would we speak French if we could just speak English. So to this day, I have never spent a significant amount of time in a place where I really, I didn't have a choice, where people spoke French but didn't speak English. So someday I would like to do that.
Yeah.
Sort of fill in the blanks, you know.
Right. And I mean, you must have a massive passive level that will, you could basically just start from there and live completely as a native.
I think so. Yeah. So my mom's native language was French. So my grandparents spoke French to her, or native language may be the wrong word, but her first language was French. She didn't speak English until she went to school.
Right.
And but she never spoke French with us at home. So yeah, it's kind of a strange situation.
Right. Did you have any other foreign languages?
So part of my spending time with foreign students was I dated a Brazilian girl when I was in high school for about 2 years. Starting in high school and then after graduation, and I spent 3 months in Brazil and Salvador, and that was my next foreign language was Brazilian Portuguese. She never spoke Portuguese to me. She helped me once in a while if I asked some questions, and I never really had a grammar book. But when I went to Brazil, I just kind of fell in love with the culture. Her mother didn't speak English, so I was only there for 3 months. But I remember when I flew to Brazil in the plane, I wanted to speak Portuguese to the flight attendants. So because I think that they were asking in Portuguese, what do you want to drink? And the only thing that I knew how to say was water. So I drank water on the way to Brazil. And on the way back, before I left back to Canada, I was talking to people on the street and stuff. I was able to communicate, and to this day, I'm kind of amazed by how I just absorbed Portuguese somehow. I've still never really studied the grammar, but I love it. It's probably my favorite language, Brazilian Portuguese.
What age were you again at this point?
I was 18, I think. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So that was my second real foreign experience. I went to Russia actually before that. I just saw this. I saw this advertisement that you could teach English in Russia. As a volunteer, and so I just graduated high school, and I thought I could do that, and so I applied, and they said yeah, and so I lived in a small city called Voronezh in Russia for 4 months when I just turned 18, and then I came back to Canada for 10 days, and then went to Brazil for 3 months. So it was an interesting start to my life after school.
Wow. So do you kind of tie all those I'll call them adventures. So, that's, I don't know many people just jet off to Brazil for 3 months and to Russia for 2 months. Do you tie all that back to those initial experiences with the exchange students in your school? Was there something else inside, or some maybe family inspiration or good friends or anyone else who had that kind of travel lust? Or
I don't know anybody who traveled so much. I didn't know anybody back then. I don't think, like Canadians, at least from where I'm from, they'll travel to the U.S. a lot. They'll travel maybe to Florida, sometimes to Mexico or different Caribbean islands for like to go to resorts. And then if people have enough money, they might, like, a lot of people will go to Europe like maybe once in their life, and when they take the trip, it's like, wow, this is, my once in a lifetime thing. And they go and try to see a bunch of countries in Western Europe. And, but yeah, so that was probably the most that I'd heard at that point. But I had, seen some things online. I hear, people travel more, people go here, people go there. And I always, I would say my whole life, I've always just looked at others and heard about others' experiences. And I've always just asked the question, well, if they can do it, then why can't I? And, if they could do all of that, then I must be able to at least do like a little bit of that, And yeah, I think it was just a combination of things. I don't know when, but at some point I did see a movie, a documentary about a trip around the world. The guy did it pretty fast in a few months, I think, and he was flying between cities. But yeah, just the whole idea of it, that was pretty cool. And when the opportunities presented themselves, I went for it.
We'll just take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, italki, but we'll be right back. On this podcast, I've interviewed hundreds of language learners, some of the world's greatest polyglots and industry experts. And one thing they all agree on is the value of one-to-one tutoring lessons. And for this, I highly recommend italki. They have thousands of teachers in all price ranges, and they even have certified teachers who have taken diplomas or have degrees in the language you're learning. So whether you're just brushing up on your Italian ahead of a trip to Rome, or you want to master Russian to take the exam, or whatever your goals are in languages, italki has a tutor suitable for you. And compared to private tutoring offline, it's really affordable. You can find informal tutors down to $5 an hour, and you can have trial lessons for even less. So if you want to master a language from the comfort of your own home, and you even get a $10 credit when you complete your first lesson, go to languageteacher.co and check out italki. It might be the best thing you do for your language learning this year.
Right, and that's a nice segue for your bigger travel. When we met in Barcelona, I said you remind me of someone, and you talked about your YouTube channel and how you'd grown a massive beard on a world tour and just gone on this massive round the world trip. So where did that even begin, and how far in the story are we for that one?
Yeah, so actually, there's a good chance that somebody listening to this podcast has seen the video, because I think it has 37 million views now, where my beard is growing as my wife and I traveled around the world. Yeah. We sort of jumped ahead quite a bit. Yeah. Maybe just briefly, how I learned Russian. Right. Because that sort of is before that. If you want to go chronologically, or we can just get into the trip.
No, yeah, let's do it. So you were there as an English teacher.
Yeah. But I didn't know any Russian then. My accent was pretty good, so I could tell people like I don't speak Russian, and they were really confused. I only knew 30 words or something, and I would confuse, like, for example, I remember one time somebody came to the school and was asking something in Russian. I didn't really understand, but I knew that they were looking for somebody. And I said something like "on не знаем," because in French you can say "on" like "we," but in Russian "on" means he. So I said like "he doesn't know" kind of thing, but with the conjugation for "we," and yeah. But I really. I didn't speak any Russian, although in 4 months, I'm sure that, there's some passive learning that happened, and I could understand some things, but I didn't speak, and I had no idea like what the cases were at all. So When I was 20, I spent some time in different cities in Canada, and Edmonton and Montreal. When I was 20, I decided to go on a religious mission for a church. And when I applied to go, they didn't give me a choice as to where I wanted to go. And they knew my history, but yeah, they decided, and they sent me to Ukraine. So I lived in Ukraine for 2 years, from 20 to 22, something like that. And I didn't really have a choice, where to go and what language to learn. So they said, go to Ukraine and learn Russian. They did a 12-week training course in the US. And I started to get a hang of it a little bit, but when I got to Ukraine, I still remember that I didn't really understand the cases. Like, I thought I understood the idea, but I just couldn't really apply it. And I had this idea that if I would just sort of mumble the endings of the words, like in Russian, for those who don't know, the ends of all nouns and pronouns and adjectives change depending on the part that they play in the sentence. And I thought if I just kind of mumbled the endings, that people would guess from context if the rest of the words were like, all right. But I quickly realized that does not work at all in Russian. That it's very important to pronounce the endings, and and a different ending can completely change the meaning of the sentence. So yeah, that was sort of an extreme immersion experience.
So you're just thrown in there with a bit of, 12 weeks is hardly a preparation. It's not a lot of time to learn such a complex language.
Yes, yeah, I definitely agree. The way it was in this church mission, there was always two of us, and everybody that I was ever with during this mission was a foreigner. So I never actually was with a native speaker. Like, I didn't live with a native speaker. So I remember after 6 weeks in Ukraine, my second, we call them companions, he was his Russian he understood worse than I did, and I think he'd been there for like 7 months or something. And so it's sort of like it was all on me at that point after 6 weeks in the country and 12 weeks at a training course. So when people would call, I would answer the phone. I remember the first time I answered, and it's just like, I've never answered the phone in Russian before, but what am I going to do? I can't just like hang up. So I picked it up, and I figured it out. And so I remember after about a year, I was pretty good. I probably made a bunch of mistakes, but after 2 years, I was very good. Made not so many mistakes. So yeah, then just briefly, we can get to the trip because that's the more interesting thing. I went to university in the States, and I studied linguistics, and I thought I would do a double major, linguistics and Russian, but I realized that a double major would just be harder, and nobody would really care that I did a double major. So I switched my major to Russian and did a minor in linguistics, just because it was easier, and I already spoke Russian really well. And I finished the bachelor's degree in 2 years. I don't know why I did that, but I am grateful that I did, because I did a study abroad while I was there in Moscow. And which is where I am now, by the way. I don't think we mentioned I'm in Moscow, Russia. And that's where I met my wife. So I was just visiting St. Petersburg for a weekend, and my wife was there. She was actually running with the Olympic torch in the relay. She won a contest and was able to take part in that. And on the way back from St. Petersburg to Moscow, we met in a train. And we started talking in Russian, and eventually we got married 14 months later. So,
wow, talk about destiny.
What's that?
Yeah, talk about destiny. How you were an English teacher in Russia, and then you were sent there by the church. You didn't choose it, even you might have chosen it anyway. But and then you meet your wife. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know how much I believe in fate and all those things, but I'm really happy that it worked out the way it did, because now we're together, and It's great. Yeah. So I was still studying, so I went back and we had a bit of a long distance relationship for, I don't know, 8 months. It was 8 months before we even saw each other again, and then I came to Russia and I proposed, and then she came to visit me in the U.S. while I was still studying. I wanted to show her what it was like to study at an American university, and then she came again, and we went to Canada and got married there, and then I moved to Russia. So since 2015, well, 14, I guess, the very, very end of 2014, Russia has sort of been my home.
Right.
But there was a big gap in there. So that was the trip.
Right. Tell us about it.
Okay. Well, we got married in December, and the way I remember, it all just kind of happened organically, and a small idea just grew a lot. And I think part of it was that my wife and I decided that we want to have kids, but we decided maybe we'll just wait a little bit. We won't have kids right away. And so I thought, well, if we're not going to have kids right away, then maybe we should travel a bit. I don't know when these ideas started, but at some point I thought, like, when I'm in my early 20s, it'd be cool to just travel, I don't know, around the world for like a year, or at least for many months, and visit a bunch of countries. And I thought about doing that. And then when I met my wife and then we got married, then I couldn't do it alone. So, I talked to her about that the first day that we met, like, that I want to travel, I want to live in different countries. And that was definitely kind of a new idea for her, like living in different countries, and that, the fact that you were born in one city doesn't mean, or one country even, doesn't mean that you need to stay there for your whole life. But she really came around to the idea, and now she can't imagine it any other way. But I thought, well, we're not having kids yet. Let's try to travel a bit before we have kids. And originally I thought we would travel for a year. And I remember very clearly we laid out this big map of the world on the floor in our living room here in Moscow. And we just sort of started drawing. We didn't literally draw it. We were just like looking, where we could go. Should we go east or west? And we thought, well, Europe's so close, it's so easy to travel in Europe, maybe we should better go east. So we figured out this rough plan of what areas we'd like to visit of the world. And we said, let's leave. I think we wanted to leave even sooner, in June, but June was getting closer. And I thought, we should have $20,000. That would be good. $20,000 would give us, like, I think it was a bit over $20 each per day for a year, something like that. I think it was more than that, but with the visas and everything, it'd be less, per day expenses. And when June was coming around, I was like, we don't have that much money. And so we put it back to September 1st. And I believe it was in August, we basically told everybody, like, we're leaving. And we made a video on a YouTube channel in Russian and announced it to everybody that we're going to do this trip around the world. And on September 2nd, actually, we ended up leaving. September 1st, my wife was feeling unprepared. I think she just quit her job like the day before was her last day. And so we did one more day, and we left on September 2nd. And we traveled around the world for 2.5 years. Yeah. So originally we thought a year, and then I thought, well, if we leave in September and then we'll arrive in Canada. The goal was to get to where I'm from in Nova Scotia, Canada. We'll get there in like fall, and it'll be winter. That kind of sucks. So I thought we'll better do like a year and a half so we can come back to Canada in the summer. And then at some point, I think we were like in India. I was counting up all the countries that we wanted to go to and how much time we had. And I was like, there's no way, like, this is way too much for this short amount of time. And so I was like, let's do 2 years. And in the end, it ended up being like 2.5. Yeah. By the time we got back to Moscow, the end of February last year.
Right. So lots of questions there. Definitely. So what kind of trip did you imagine when you set out? Was it going to be, did you bring a tent, or was it supposed to be like hostels or what kind of, did you have any of that planned, or did you just kind of fly into it?
Well, we've been pretty open about our budget. So we had about $13,000 when we started. And when you set off on a trip like that, you have no idea how much the money is going to last.
Right.
And there's things that can happen that you just can't predict. If you lose your passport, or I don't know, you get sick or something, like the costs can add up really quickly. So we set out with the mindset that we better keep our budget really low. And I remember even when we were laying on the floor with the map, I said, we can try hitchhiking. I'd done a little bit before. I'd hitchhiked in Canada a little bit, like Montreal and back, which is pretty far, but relative to our world trip is not that much. And Israel a little bit, Ukraine, I think. Later when I visited Ukraine, I hitchhiked from Odessa to Kyiv. But I thought, yeah, we could try hitchhiking, wherever it's possible, we can do it. And because my wife had never hitchhiked before, I was, I wasn't like, we're going to hitchhike all around the world. But we set off to start hitchhiking, and we thought, well, if we can't hitchhike, we'll just get buses or whatever. Mm-hmm. But we ended up hitchhiking basically everywhere. A bit of a spoiler. We did hitchhike everywhere, basically. And we mostly stayed with people via couch surfing. So, right. Yeah, if by chance there's anybody who doesn't know what couch surfing is listening, it's this website. It's kind of like a social network for people who either want to host travelers at their home or when they're traveling, stay at other people's homes for free. And so when you're planning to go to a city, you just you look on the website who lives there, you write the messages, and hopefully somebody will answer and say, yeah, please come stay with me. And I'd say like at least 80% of the time we were with people via couch surfing.
Right.
I think I can probably pull up the statistics, but we stayed we stayed in hotels like 30 days, I think, in 2.5 years, and we didn't pay for most of the nights because of our YouTube channel. We just started writing people and saying, we have a YouTube channel, can we stay with you? And we'll put your hotel in our video. So about more than half of the time that we were in hotels was for free. So that kept our expenses down quite a bit. After we went across Russia, we went east. We went maybe just quickly, I'll just say we went east through Russia, down Mongolia, China, Southeast Asia, India, and then we flew to Egypt, and we went through Egypt through Africa, from Egypt through to Namibia, all hitchhiking, and then we flew from Namibia to Brazil, and we did this loop around South America and visited most of the countries there, and then we flew to Central America because it turns out there's no road from Colombia to Panama, and then we went through Central America, Mexico, and in the U.S. we bought a car and drove around the U.S. for I think like 4 months maybe, and then we went to Canada, and we went up to the west coast of Canada, drove all the way across Canada to the east coast where I'm from, and we stayed there for a few months, and then we went back to Russia. Actually, it's funny because in my mind this part of the trip is like an afterthought, but we flew to Vladivostok, the far east of Russia, and took trains all the way across Russia, which I know a lot of people like. It's like their lifelong dream is to do that, but that was like the end of our trip that we just kind of did, and it was really cool because by that time we had a bunch of subscribers on YouTube, so we stopped in we had 17 meetings in different cities with our subscribers. It was really fun.
Wow, that's amazing. And how did you? The YouTube channel, just for a bit of context, was that something that you started before and you had built up a bit of traction, or did it all come because you were posting videos from the trip?
Mostly from the trip. I had long watched YouTube, probably from the very beginning, 2007 or whatever, and I'd followed a lot of vlogs and different types of channels, but I really liked family vlogs and just people sharing their life. And I thought that would be really cool, that I'd like to do that too. So when I met my wife, I started telling her about that too. And she was pretty skeptical about it, about whether or not she'd like to share her life and be so public. Russians are typically not so public, like they're not, yeah, public, I guess. Yeah, yeah. Probably it's a little bit historical. They're worried about, you know, I don't know, the KGB or something. I don't know. If you say the wrong thing or somebody catches you doing something wrong, then you get in trouble or something. Maybe that's why. I don't know. The Russians are usually pretty private with people that they don't know, and yeah, that's just the way the culture is. But eventually, yeah, when I proposed to my wife and she said yes, I believe, or when I was about to propose, I like created a YouTube channel, Jon and Eva, and my wife's name is Eva, or Yeva in Russian, and then like all of the different social networks, I reserved the name. And yeah, once we got married, we started it, but we didn't post very much before the trip. So to answer your question, is most of the subscribers and most of the traction we got was after we went on the trip. Yeah. So when we made the announcement, we had like maybe 600 subscribers, because that's another story. But we got a shout out on a channel, and a few hundred people subscribed to us. We had like 50 before that. And then when we made the announcement, I think we had maybe like 1,200 subscribers when we left on day one. And now in our Russian channel, we're at, I think, 65,000 subscribers, something like that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I think the reason that I asked about that is because I'm sure there were people listening who would say, "Oh yeah, they went on a 2.5-year trip because they had a massive YouTube channel before they went off." But it just goes to show that if you document and put some time. I mean, I've seen the videos; they're great quality, and some of them. The other day I was scrolling Facebook on my phone, and it recommended to me the beard video of yours where you're taking it off. Well, at least I think it's you, but
probably
that's
people.
Kind of funny when,
every few days, like one of these big
talked.
Facebook groups asks us to share the video, and at the beginning I was like saying no, but then I was like, whatever. They put a link to our channel, so I just say yes to everybody now, as long as they don't post it on YouTube and they link to our channel. So hopefully, I guess that helps. A few times people have even paid us to put the video up, but most of them are just take it. And some people do it without our permission, but
yeah, that will always happen. But I guess the beard was just kind of you said I won't shave until I'm done with the trip, or
yeah, at the beginning it was sort of like, do I take a razor or not? And I just like, no, I think this is a good opportunity. Nobody's like really gonna tell me to shave my beard. Like I don't go to school or work or whatever. So yeah, it was really cool. By the end, like it was over 30 centimeters, like 35 maybe centimeters long, and I was a little bit tired of it. Like I was kind of excited to shave it and see what it would be like finally after 2.5 years to not have a beard again, but I missed it too after cutting it off. It attracts a lot of attention. Like people remember seeing you, even if you didn't talk to them, because you're like, wow, that's a really long beard, and it was interesting for sure. But there was one other thing you said that I was going to mention. I can't remember.
I couldn't recognize you for sure at the gathering. That's why I was like, you seem familiar, but without a big beard, you that good. Well, you do have a beard now, a smaller one, but
yeah, like at the gathering, everybody was like, "Oh, you don't have a beard." And I was like, "I do. I have
quite a respect.
One of the longest beards here, but it's relatively short. Yeah, for sure, just a couple centimeters.
Your previous beard, like so what I'm getting out of your story here with the tour is that it's a lot cheaper to travel than maybe people think, or maybe people fear.
Definitely,
it's a lot easier. Are there any things that do you have any sort of like top tips or maybe big takeaways if you had to do I don't know, maybe you want to do a similar trip again? What kind of things would you kind of be extra careful with, more aware of?
Okay. Yeah, I remember one thing I wanted to say was about having a big channel before. So we didn't, and we didn't really make money from YouTube. I think we made maybe $6,000 in 2.5 years, something like that. Maybe even less. Like it was like $150 a month max.
Right.
Which actually, by the time we got to that point, we were like, wow, we could probably travel forever now, because mostly thanks to the generosity and kindness of people that were giving us rides and were hitchhiking and letting us stay at their place. With couch surfing, they don't have to feed you, but most people do. So we didn't like, we ended up we always tried to spend like $5 a day for both of us. Sometimes it would go a bit over, but overall we were pretty close, like $6 something, not counting visas and flights. We're at like $6 or $7 a day for the whole trip. Wow. And counting visas and flights, I think it was like $11 a day for 2 people. I know people that travel way less, and I know other people that say like, oh, you can't travel for less than 1,000 or I don't know, a month or whatever. And it's like, I know people have traveled for several months with like $1 a day, and it's definitely possible. I mean, you need other people to help you. But you can definitely do it. It's definitely possible.
Right.
But things that I would say, I would definitely say it's way easier than people might think. I didn't really have any examples of somebody who had done quite what we did before we started. I've met people since then. We've sort of attracted them, or we found them, who've done similar things. But it's like I said, near the beginning of this interview, is that I often see other people do something, and I think, well, if they could do it, then why couldn't I? And I remember finding like one person, for example, a couple who hitchhiked from Moscow to Hong Kong, through Russia and maybe Kazakhstan or Mongolia, and then through China. And I thought, wow, that's cool. And he posted videos while I was doing it. He's like, yeah, you can do it, and you can post videos from China, you can use a VPN and get around the firewall. And I thought, well, if he could do that, then we could do that. And it's definitely way cheaper if you do what we do, what we did, where we went from country to country by land. Because if you fly from London to Vietnam, and then go back to London, and then fly to Thailand, and then go back to London, and then fly, the tickets are extremely expensive. But if you're in Vietnam, it's not that hard to get to Cambodia or get to Thailand. It's you can do it in a day or whatever, and you can do it for free. So, or for like an extremely cheap bus if you don't want to hitchhike. But we had a great experience hitchhiking everywhere, every country that we went to. We visited 33 countries. I wouldn't really recommend going as fast as we did. 33 countries in 2.5 years. It was pretty fast. We spent an average like 2 or 3 nights in each city. So it was pretty much just like constantly moving. And I think like 3 times we spent a week in a city.
Right.
In 2.5 years. So like it's, there's so many things that come along with that you don't necessarily always think about. But every time you come to a new city, you have to figure out so many new things. How can I connect?
Going, like if I can interject, because I mean, for me personally, definitely it would be exciting. I love traveling. It's one of my favorite hobbies. But
yeah,
I would say if I go to a couple of places within a very short period of time, I sort of get. I don't know if it's kind of overstimulation or something. I don't know what the thing is, but it sounds pretty hardcore to do that kind of traveling for so long. Do you have any idea what kept you going, and what was exciting about it, if you could put words to that? I know the whole experience is probably exciting, but are there any things you can think back to where you're like, maybe you were super tired, but you kept going because of, I don't know, someone you met, or is it some kind of cultural experience, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think overall having a goal helped, so much, because we had a friend, like we met him in Vietnam, he's from Russia, and he said he left Russia planning to travel for 7 years, and he didn't really know where he was going to go. And I think that's a lot more difficult. He ended up going back much sooner, which, there's nothing wrong with that. But like, when you start and just say like, I'm going to travel for a long time, that's kind of, it's hard to just keep going. You can get tired, or you just have you don't have a sense of direction. But our goal was to get to Canada. We weren't super stubborn. Like, we could have quit in the middle, but I don't know. I'm the kind of person that if I set a goal, then I'm probably going to just do it. But other smaller goals helped, and other sort of deadlines. Like when we bought plane tickets, like I think we were in, maybe we had already entered India, but we were in India for 2 months, and we bought a ticket from India to Egypt. And when you already have a plane ticket, for me, it's like, well, like I'm not just gonna waste that money. So we got to get to Kochi in the south of India and fly to Egypt. And then we bought the ticket from Namibia to Brazil, I think pretty early on. And so like we had, a few months where we knew that we got to fly, and, we got to get to that city by that day, or else we're going to, lose a bunch of money. And so that helped for sure. And by the time when we bought tickets to Brazil, I was like, wow, we're going to do this. Like when we started, I didn't know. We just made sure that we always had enough money to fly home, like to Russia, I guess, if we needed to, or to Canada maybe.
Right.
But I didn't know if we would actually be able to make it. I didn't know how much money it was all going to cost. So when we were in Africa and we bought tickets to Brazil, I was like, wow, this is really going to happen. I had no doubt. And when we got to Brazil, it was like, wow, this is easy. We're already in the Americas,
Right.
And the world sort of seemed smaller after all of that. I think, what kept us going? Yeah, you mentioned people, and that was the biggest thing of our trip. We went to Peru and we didn't visit Machu Picchu, for example, and a lot of people think like that's insane, because most people go to Peru and they think like, this is my trip of a lifetime, I'm never going to come back. And, you got to see everything in 2 weeks because you have, to go back to work or whatever. But every country we visited, we sort of had a different mindset, where like we were sort of just like, we sort of treated it as like buffet. So we tried a little bit of everything, and if you like it, then go back and get more of what you liked.
Right.
So we just think, if we like Peru, then we'll go back, and I'm sure we will. But we, for example, most people go to Machu Picchu in Peru, but we spent Christmas and New Year's with a Peruvian family, and that was just an amazing experience, and I'm sure it was better than Machu Picchu. So the people were the biggest thing, and there were definitely times where we got a bit tired and where we felt like maybe like almost guilt, maybe not the right word, but it felt kind of like wrong that we didn't feel like going out, like we're in a new city and we don't really want to go and see that thing or whatever. But overall, like if you just look at it like as a buffet, then there's not that many regrets. It was definitely a unique experience, and the people were the best part of it, especially when you get to stay in their homes.
What was the most surprising place you went to that maybe you had some preconceptions or you didn't know anything about it, and you got there and it was just like, what?
I gotta be honest, like we did not study that much before. Like
Right.
we studied like visas and stuff, but there were so many times where I was just like surprised. Like I was surprised often by the landscapes. Like when we were driving into Beijing, and I was like, wow, there's freaking mountains here. Like I did not realize that there's mountains here. Like on the maps that I look at, I usually like either they're not marked or I don't notice the mountains. And so there was many times where I was like, wow, there's mountains, or like all of Peru, basically from south to north is like a desert on the coast. And then there's mountains, and then the other side is like jungle. And so like I didn't really realize that like Lima is basically in a desert, and I've heard about like I think it's Atacama Desert in Chile, but I just sort of didn't connect all the dots. And yeah, there were a lot of situations like that where I just like I didn't know, but that sort of like added to the fun of it. If we just read about everything before we went, then I think maybe a little bit less interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. That it's part of the adventures, and from what I can understand, you had a very non-touristy experience as well, which is
yeah. We practically never saw tourists, to be honest. Like I mean, yeah, like in Africa, I remember we like never saw tourists except for once in a while, like maybe 2 or 3 times on borders, we'd see like a bus full of white people or whatever. But we pretty much never saw tourists. So that was fun. Like when we would hitchhike, I would just look at every country. You would sort of realize quickly how fast you could move on average. So like in India, like 200 kilometers in a day would be like pretty good. Depending in the south, it was a bit better. So you could do maybe like 400. And so we would just look for a city that was about that far away, like which cities are in that radius. And then we would search and couch surfing who was there in these cities. And then write to a bunch of them, like a lot of them sometimes. Like some people try and they're like, oh, nobody answers me. But in some cities we would write like 30 messages and one person would answer or nobody would answer. And then we would end up in these random cities that would have like 50,000 people, or I don't know, even 200,000 people in like Peru. And if you go open the Wikipedia page, it just like tells you the population, nothing else, you know. And I was always like curious, like who lives there? Why do they live there? You know, like why don't they move? And you know, it was interesting to me to go to places that people don't usually go to. And it's not that hard, to be honest. Like even in Thailand, if you're like on Phuket Island where there's tons of tourists, you just go like 5 kilometers away and there's no tourists. It's like they're always in these very like limited spaces, usually like limited areas.
Yeah. Did you ever get a chance to watch Bold and Bankrupt running around Eastern Europe?
Bold and Bankrupt. I don't think so. I think you mentioned that when we were in Bratislava. I'm not sure if I've seen it. No.
Because he's the exact that's what he does. I mean, he doesn't go that far. He's in mostly Eastern Europe, but just because he went to the Belarusian Chernobyl exclusion zone and found people who still lived in, you know, old houses with no electricity.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. I just thought of it.
Things that we were surprised about, like it's a couple things that were amazing. I love Brazil. It's probably my favorite country. I don't know. Country is a sort of an abstract idea, but definitely like my favorite culture. And one thing I love about Brazil is the diversity. I think a lot of people don't know anything about Brazil, but they don't realize how big it is and how many people there are and how diverse it is. So there's, like, for example, Brazil has, I think, 1.3 million Japanese people, the biggest population of Japanese people outside of Japan. There's just like everybody. There's like Italian cities, German cities, where people still speak German and Italian. Like, what's her name? Gisele Bündchen or whatever, like supermodel. She's German Brazilian, right? And I think she speaks German. That's just like one example, but there's lots of them. And so when we were on our way to Brazil, I think there's even like an American town somewhere. For some reason, like Americans moved to Brazil, and like I don't know, like during World War II or something. I don't know. But I was searching for who lives there, and because I spent time in Ukraine and Russia, I searched for Ukrainians in Brazil, and Russians in Brazil, and I found Ukrainians in Brazil. That there's a lot of them too. I don't remember how many, but there's a lot. And there's this one city called Prudentopolis. It's in the south in a state called Paraná, and there's 55,000 people, and it's 80% Ukrainian.
Wow.
And my wife's half Ukrainian too, so it was really interesting to her. And anyway, we ended up going there. It was just an amazing experience. We met Ukrainian Brazilians, and we met like a 90-year-old guy who still spoke Ukrainian, and a lot of them like spoke a little bit, but the young kids there to this day, they study Ukrainian dances and they cook some Ukrainian foods, and it was really interesting. And we did the same thing with Russians. There's Russians there that are old believers. They're kind of like, it's probably a crude comparison, but kind of like Amish or something. Like they're sort of closed off. They have long beards. They make their own clothes, and the women have long hair, and they sort of marry each other. It's frowned upon to marry outside of the faith, you know. Yeah. And I saw like some reports about them on Brazilian news reports on YouTube, and I just somehow found the coordinates to one of them on this weird site with a bunch of ads, and was like, we got to go there. And they usually are not super open, but we were really lucky. We met an amazing couple that just, I don't know, like I had a long beard and I spoke Russian. Maybe that helped, but they really like welcomed us in. We spent, I think, just one night or 2 nights in their home, and just showed up at their doorstep basically. And they showed us around their village and told us their stories. It was just, that was amazing. We were just like pinching ourselves the whole time. Like, we are in Brazil speaking Russian with like a woman who was born in China and a man who was born in Uruguay, and their Russian is still like perfect, except they have a bunch of really old words that people don't speak and people don't use in Russia anymore. And yeah, amazing.
Yeah, that's definitely a unique experience. And actually, I had a similar experience recently, but it's slightly further. I don't know when. Do you know roughly when this town was formed? Is it like 100 years ago, or is it?
I think it was a little over 100. I think the Ukrainian one.
Yeah, or the Russian one. 'Cause,
They've been in the one woman was born in China, so they haven't. At least the people that we met, one was born in Uruguay. I think they've been there like maybe like 50, 60 years, something like that.
Right. Because what I did, I just went on a road trip in the US, and I went to a little Danish town, and it was exactly the same experience. Where I mean, they're American, of course, but they have Danish blood, and it's about 110, 120 years ago since the village was formed. So the language is gone now, except for there's a few old people where the grandmother would have spoken to them in Danish. So they speak with this very strong American accent, still pretty understandable Danish, but most of them, almost all of them, don't speak any. But they still have, and that's funny when you said it, because it's exactly the same. They have the folk dancing, and they have the food. So some of the dishes have survived over there, and they've sort of changed some of the recipes. They mixed some of the dishes, and some of the meat dishes changed animal at some point. There's all these kind of like funny small things, but it's funny to see that kind of. It's almost like an evolution, but simultaneous in two different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a shame that the language goes lost. I think it's a natural reaction to the kind of the host country, maybe. But it's just funny that I don't even know how far that is from Iowa to Brazil. It's quite far, but you can have that similar experience, and
definitely.
It's so similar as well. It's amazing. I wish I could go over there and teach them Danish, but I don't think the motivation is there, even if they say so.
Yeah. That was the story you're telling is similar to the Ukrainian village, the town in Brazil. They would but every Saturday they had like Ukrainian lessons and dance lessons, but they have like Ukrainian churches all over the place, but the young people don't know the language at all, really. But they still like. We spoke at the school there, and we went to their like Saturday school, kind of like Sunday school, and
right. So it might only be 1 or 2 generations before they're in the same situation as the Danish town, maybe.
Could be, yeah. But I asked them, like the kids, like who here is Ukrainian? Like everybody puts up their hand, and
right.
That was really interesting. that they're Brazilian. Like I also asked them, like, do you ever feel like you're not Brazilian? Like if you go to another town, with other Brazilians that you're different, you don't fit in, and they're like, no, we're Brazilian, so we're Ukrainian.
Yeah,
and that's one thing I love about Brazil. We saw the same thing in Canada too. We if anybody's ever near Edmonton, there's a really cool Ukrainian village, like open air museum, like with actors, and super cool. Like they speak Ukrainian, and we had a little bit of a taste of that there too. There's a lot of Ukrainians in Canada too. Like I think also more than 1 million, and we don't have that many people.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. Well, super cool. I hope that your story has inspired some people to pack up the rucksack and go explore the world, because it definitely has for me. I think that the world is, like you mentioned previously, has become so much smaller. The opportunities to travel are just ever growing, and with the social media and the new kind of ways to stay online all the time, even if you're in the middle of nowhere in Asia, you can still contact people on WhatsApp and whatever.
Definitely.
Has really made it possible. So thank you for sharing that first and foremost. And just one little thing I was hoping we could touch on as well, if you have a few more minutes.
Yeah, I've got time.
Cool. So when you met your wife, you had a pretty decent Russian level already.
Yeah.
How can you share a little bit about the multilingual relationship, maybe for people who haven't tried that or haven't seen that in action? Because I'm sure people are thinking, do you speak English at home? Do you speak Russian? Did it change at some point? Did you talk about it? How did that work out?
Well, yeah, when we met, I just said hello in Russian, and she said hello back, and she didn't realize immediately that I was foreign, but I told her probably like the a few sentences later that I'm Canadian, and that was confusing. You know, it was like in the cheapest train that night, the longest, slowest night train from St. Petersburg to Moscow, and she wasn't expecting. It was me and I think there was 4 other Americans, and yeah. Anyway, that's not every day that you see Americans on the cheapest trains, and yeah. So we from the very beginning we spoke Russian, and we never really switched. I think like near the beginning of our marriage, my wife would like say, "Okay, we're going to speak English on Saturdays or something," but it would just last for like half an hour or something. So we would just always speak Russian because my Russian is like at a very high level, and my wife's English is very good now too, but not as good as my Russian, I guess. So yeah, we just always did that, and for some reason, like when I went to Ukraine, and I just had it in my mind that I wanted to like master Russian, like not just speak Russian, but master Russian. So I put in a lot of effort, and I guess it paid off. So because Russian to me is sort of like a second native language now, not quite, but I can do anything that natives can, and some things better than natives sometimes, you know, than some natives, you know. So
what kind of things did you do in Ukraine when you were there? Did you work with textbooks, or did you just try to use the language as much as possible?
It was mostly using the language. So because all day, every day, it was sort of this really strict schedule. So I would have to, we had an hour every day to study. And then I think we had to be out of the apartment at like 11 a.m. and we should be back at the apartment at like 9 p.m. So like at least, I guess that's 10 hours a day. We're just like talking to people either on the street or at in their homes and stuff. So it was a lot of using it. We did have like some textbooks, a couple, that was helpful. I definitely think that there's that's really useful. Like even at the first time when I was in Russia, if I had just a book and started reading it, I think it would have helped me a lot, because when you're living in the environment and you constantly hear the language, if like the same day you read a page from a grammar book, like some kind of course book, then the same day you hear the things that you just learned, you know, and right. You constantly were hearing them, but you didn't realize, you know, and you just gradually put the pieces together. Yeah. So unfortunately, we weren't allowed to use like iPads or computers. Really, we didn't have computers. We'd write home once a week by email, but I think there was tools that I could have used if I had access to like a smartphone or a computer, that, you know, like flashcards or something like that I think could have sped things up a little bit. I was also slightly limited by the fact that because it was a religious mission, I pretty much talked about the same things every day. So I would repeat certain things like every single day, like many times a day, and the language that we were exposed to was a bit limited. So I could have learned it faster, I think, if I didn't have those limitations. But it was also, you know, this amazing opportunity to constantly be in the environment. But in terms of what I did, also, like one of the big things for me was just really active listening. Like because I was there for 2 years, and almost everybody that I was with were foreigners that were doing the same thing. I saw different, you know, people have different experiences, and people reach different levels. And a lot of times people would reach a certain level and just sort of like become complacent. They would think, well, you know, I can communicate. People understand me. I understand them. It's enough, you know. And they wouldn't really study new words, and they wouldn't work on their accent at all. But for whatever reason, I just had this drive, and I would write down words constantly. If I was sitting, you know, at a table with somebody, like drinking tea or whatever, I would have my little notepad on the table, and I would write down things that they were saying that I didn't understand. And sometimes I'd ask them, but usually I just write them down, and then I'd look them up in the dictionary when I got home. Sometimes, like if it was cold in the winter, and I was talking to people on the street, when they would say words I didn't know, I would remember them. Like, so it was cold, so I couldn't write them down or whatever comfortably. And then I would like make a list in my head where I would have like, I don't know, sometimes maybe like 8 or 10 words, or I would just like keep repeating the words that I'd heard that I didn't know in my head. And when I got home, I'd write them all down, and then I would look them up in the dictionary. So just this constant, like very, very active learning. And, you know, just when I didn't understand something, I would ask people, and over time I'd made some friends that spoke English well and spoke Russian, you know, that were native Russian speakers. So I would call them and say, what does this mean? Like, why is it like this? And, just this gradual but very active process that got me to where I am today with my Russian. And that lasted for, even when I finished that 2 years, I still studied quite actively. When I was in university, I lived in, they had this foreign language housing. So you have to apply, and I got into this Russian house. So in the apartment, every apartment, there was 6 people, and they had one native speaker. And we were only allowed to speak Russian in the apartment. So yeah, that also helped. But the active learning continued after that. Like I would try to read our articles, like news. Like I don't like reading the news, but I would read the news in Russian just to like practice.
Right.
And I would just like take every article, and sometimes I'd put it into like learning with text, and look up every single word that I didn't know, and make some flashcards, and I would watch TV shows or Russian movies, and just really actively try to get everything I could out of them. But I think that lasted maybe 4 or 5 years max. And for the last like 4 years that I've been speaking Russian, I've sort of been more passive. So I probably could learn more than I do, but it's almost like my English, you know, that you learn. You see words in your native language, and you're like, oh, that's new. And like, oh, you might look it up and be like, oh, that's cool. Like, I'm watching an old TV show in English, and there's a bunch of words that I don't know. And I look them up, but I just forget them. That's kind of where I am with my Russian now. Because the words that I don't know are mostly pretty rare. So I just like, whatever. I don't need to know them all.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And the jump from advanced to native, like, did you feel anything there? Because obviously that's a huge leap to go from being, let's say, functionally fluent, could do pretty much anything, to maybe start being, I don't know if it's a culture or the fact that we're missing from that last step. You know, you can speak everything right, but if you don't know maybe some of the idioms and some of the fixed expressions, I don't know if there's a difference. Maybe advanced and native like are very close synonyms.
You know, I don't like, it may be bold of me to say, you know, it's close to native, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is. I think it's like,
Well, native language, I think, is a good approximation anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
What does it take? But I don't know. Like it's interesting because there's so many examples in English where, you know, I'm from Canada, and there's people that, you know, I've met so many people who've lived in Canada for, I don't know, 30 years or 40 years, or, you know, who English wasn't their native language, and they're I don't know. Most of them are not. You wouldn't say they're like native though, to be honest. They still have an accent, right? And yeah,
I think that's an interesting point also. Because the language at that point, the new words are going to be so rare that you're growing your vocabulary at like one word a week, maybe less.
Yeah.
And if there's fixed expressions and stuff, then that can be hard to get as well.
I think it's just a very active thing, you know, like in order, if you like, you don't need to do it. What I've done with Russian, nobody needs to do that. There's not really a good reason to be close to native in accent, you know. Of course, you know, vocabulary and grammar and stuff it's good to have, but the most important thing is, I'm sure a million times has been stated in this podcast, is that people can understand you and you can understand them, right? And
that's the first goal.
Yeah, for me though, like I just, for some reason, like to this day, I'm probably today and definitely a couple days, I remember just like, wait, like tell my wife, like repeat that again. And I'm like, wow, I did not realize that, you know, like for example, nравится. Nравится means like, for example, мне нравится, like I like this, right? And just a couple days ago, I realized that there's like that I just, for some reason, it never like struck me that the E sound becomes an I. And I just like never even realized that happens in Russian. But nravitsa, nobody says nravitsa. They say nravitsa.
Yeah.
But this vowel is E. And it's basic. If I'm not mistaken, I checked the IPA, and it's the same as I, like it or is, which Russians have a hard time with in English, but they actually have that sound in Russian.
Maybe.
And so to this day, it's I find these things, and I'm still trying to iron out little things. I'm not perfect in my Russian, and definitely like my handwriting gives me away if I ever write anything. But luckily these days that happens less and less.
Well, that's definitely fine. I mean, that you're at such a high level that these are tiny nuances. But again, one of the problems, if anyone out there listening has attempted to learn Russian or working on Russian, is some of the sound corruptions that are not really explained anywhere and not really mentioned.
Yes.
That is a bit of a mystery where you will get in trouble, because how are you supposed to know? Oh yeah,
there's
you know that it's supposed to sound like this, not this. Oh
yeah, there's a lot of phonology in Russian that I've never seen explained, even when I did for like a full bachelor's degree in Russian. Like there's some things that never were explained to me.
Yeah, you need the PhD apparently to get anywhere close.
Perhaps, yeah. There were a few little things. Like there was a really good class about phonology, and when I was in university, and I loved that. There was certain things that I just nobody ever told me. Like I guess I'd already been speaking Russian for 4 years, and I just realized like the raised E, the yeah sound changes to yeah, I don't know. This is only interesting to a very limited group of people. But for example, yes or есть, like the yeah or yeah, they're two different sounds, but it happens all over the language. But it's rarely talked about. I've never seen it talked about in any basic courses.
No, and that makes Russian one of the harder ones.
Yeah, but for the most part, like you can more or less get by without a lot of those things. So yeah, but you just obviously be a foreigner. That's just the way it is.
And that's okay. I think that's acceptable. But if I can comment a bit on your language, I mean, I don't know if anyone has ever done that, because I think when you said if I had some technological help, I could have sped it up. I'm not sure about that, because I think what you did is you embraced. First of all, you went head first, so you just like, okay, I got to do it. You had a goal. You had a limited time in the country. So you knew that you had to make it happen. 2 years, right? It's a relatively long period, but it goes by quickly, and especially if you're gonna learn such a complicated language. And you went old school. You had a pen and pad, so you got the what they call it, the connection, the muscle connection to the brain.
Right.
And I think apps are. They're kind of like good and bad. Apps can definitely elevate your learning, and I think something like flashcards is basically like the Matrix sometimes. Just kind of download words directly into your brain. But I also think apps have caused us to have a very low attention span, and a very kind of like we're kind of bombarding the pleasure center with lingots and rewards and badges and all this kind of stuff. That I don't know if that has a net positive effect. If you're destroying your concentration forever, but you learned 500 words and memorized, is that really worth it? So I would say that your method, I don't know if it takes longer or less. To me, it doesn't really matter. But in terms of efficiency and the natural language that you develop, which sometimes the apps don't develop because they're so focused on vocabulary, I think that was a huge boon for you, a huge benefit that maybe you don't see yourself because you were the main character, you were in it. But I haven't heard of a lot of people lately who have actually done this. So I think that's probably partly some of your success comes from this kind of old school approach where you're actually putting pen to paper, you're being curious about it, but you can't just look it up. That's the problem. If you said a Russian word now that I don't know, I could literally Google it on my phone while I'm speaking.
Right.
So that means my brain is not storing that for any serious amount of time, because it always thinks, well, you can just look it up again. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think you did. I think you did really well. I mean, I'm not sure how much you thought about that activity when you were in it, but kind of looking back, I would say if I could recommend something, it would be more of that.
You might be right. Yeah, there's a big distraction factor too. You know, that if I had access to all those things, then maybe I would have just it would have done more harm than good. Yeah, but I think that just a very if I was just limited, for example, to like Anki, I don't use Anki these days, but I think when I start a new language, I will. Or even just like watching, like even like I don't know, listening to a radio or watching TV or movies. I didn't have access to that for those 2 years, so I had a really limited input, which I think I could have benefited by having a little bit more input. But still, yeah, you're right. There's definitely some benefits to what I did, and yeah, it's definitely different to repeat a word in your head all day or for multiple hours before you have a chance to write it down than just like jotting it down on your phone and that's it,
Yeah.
or searching for the translation right away.
I think so, and definitely, yeah, I circled that as well when you said the active listening, because I definitely made the mistake when I tried to learn Russian really seriously. I definitely made the mistake of putting a lot of work into the active component. So, reading a book or doing an app, or reading is good, I suppose, but like a textbook, like a self-study book.
Yeah.
And apps and software and all those kind of like courses, online lessons and stuff. And I realized afterwards that I hadn't really gotten that much input, just good old-fashioned input, So I think, if anything, most people would also be lacking in that, where because you need to listen to the language to be able to replicate it, right?
Yeah, you can never reproduce it if you don't have the input. That's right.
Yeah, and I just think I think it comes back to this kind of focus on concentration levels, where we just don't have it anymore because of all this technology around us. So people can't sit and listen or watch a program where maybe they don't understand, that much. But actually, that's a great way to sort of fill the time between lessons or study sessions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Jon or Jonathan, both.
Jon's fine. Yeah, Jon.
It's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and I wish I could have gone on a trip like yours, and I probably will in the future. But I'm really happy that you came by and shared some of your insights in both traveling, which is something that we occasionally have on the podcast, because I know a lot of people are excited about potentially traveling and using some of their language skills.
Mm-hmm.
But also your experience learning Russian to a really high level. Sometimes we spend a little bit too much time on the show talking about getting to that first stage, the functional kind of level where you can go out and enjoy the language, which is a great step to get to, but we don't often talk about, what happens after. So I'm happy that you were able to share a few insights on your journey to near native, I think was the term we
Sure.
would fit. So thank you so much for that. And I guess the last thing, where could people find more about you? What's the name of your YouTube channel?
Yeah. So the Russian channel is Jon Eva, if you speak Russian. If you just write Jon and Eva in English too, you'll find us. But we have an English YouTube channel too, which we mostly started after the trip. It's called Can Rush, CANRUSH. It's sort of like Canada, Russia. That was the idea. Yeah. So like you can find us on Instagram too, Jon and Eva. But if I'll be happy if anybody's interested, you can see our trip around the world in Russian, or we'll be doing some videos in English soon, sort of recapping the trip. And I'll be happy if anybody wants to reach out if you have any questions or comments.
Awesome. And do you have any future plans? I mean, now you're a father. Congratulations. But,
thank you. Yes.
Do you want to? Is the traveling then on permanent hold, or are you gonna? Is it itching again?
Yeah, definitely we want to travel. So, yeah, there's this bureaucracy thing where like I'm trying to get Russian citizenship right now to be a dual citizen. So we're in Russia at the moment, but like tomorrow I'm going to apply for permanent residency, and then in 6 months I should be able to apply for citizenship if no laws change and everything goes smoothly. And my wife's waiting for permanent residency in Canada. So we're sort of between Russia and Canada now, but we definitely want to travel around Russia and around Canada. We have to live in Canada for 3 years for my wife to apply for citizenship, but we'll definitely get out and visit some other places as well. But yeah, definitely we'll be traveling. And our thinking is now that as soon as we finish, as soon as my wife becomes a Canadian citizen, so all, well, 3 of us now, maybe there'll be more kids then, we'll all be dual citizens, then we want to go live somewhere else, and probably Brazil for a couple of years, but it could change. So on our channels, we kind of post about videos about languages a little bit, but about life and travel in different countries, and there's definitely going to be a lot more of that in the future. And I don't know if we'll do another trip around the world, but we very well may. Yeah.
Well, sounds good.
Yeah, there's so many opportunities.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it, and if you grow another beard, then you'll have another video to answer the question of it.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Cool.
Might do it. Thank you, Chris. Thanks.
No problem. All right, I'll just stop the recording here.
If you're looking for a language teacher to enhance your language learning, then I highly recommend italki. Italki is the world's biggest tutoring platform, and you can find thousands of teachers and tutors at very reasonable prices. Get a free lesson after completing your first lesson by going to languageteacher.co.